Joining us from our studio in Tokyo, this is NHK Newsline. We start with the latest developments in what's become a chaotic race for the White House. Donald Trump says he intends to debate his Democratic challenger Joe Biden face-to-face next week, despite being ill with COVID-19. Trump tweeted that he is looking forward to the event on October 15th in Miami. But there are questions about how to hold the remaining debates safely now that Trump and several of his top aides have tested positive. On the campaign trail, Biden expressed reservations.
I think if he still has COVID, we shouldn't have a debate.
He added that strict guidelines would need to be followed if the event goes ahead. Trump also claimed falsely on social media that COVID-19 is far less deadly than the seasonal flu. That prompted Twitter to warn the message included potentially harmful information, while Facebook took down the post. And he announced that negotiations over a $1 trillion coronavirus relief package were being suspended until after the election, rattling stock markets. Those statements come a day after Trump returned to the White House from a hospital where he was being treated for the potentially deadly disease. His doctors say he had no symptoms as of Tuesday morning. But conflicting statements about his condition over the weekend have raised questions about the true state of his health. Meanwhile, the coronavirus continues to spread through the White House. Trump advisor Stephen Miller announced on Tuesday that he had tested positive. 9 Democratic lawmakers have criticized the Trump administration for failing to take adequate precautions. In a statement, they said they're alarmed by the disregard for the health of staff and journalists at the White House. They described the outbreak there as out of control. More than a dozen people in Trump's inner circle have been infected. The president's opponent refrained from criticizing him while he was in hospital. Now Joe Biden is calling for national unity. Trump is calling for something else. Here's NHK World's Catherine Kobayashi.
The battlefields of Gettysburg remind Americans of when they turned on each other and a speech that asked whether their nation could endure. Joe Biden came to deliver his own address to make his own case for national unity.
We are facing too many crises. We have too much work to do. We have too bright a future to have it shipwrecked on the shoals of anger and hate and division.
The president may not have been listening. How does Biden lead in Pennsylvania polls, Trump wrote, saying he would win the state. Trump's illness has not kept him off social media. His team turned his return from hospital into a promotional video. And the president says contracting the virus was a risk he had to take.
I led. Nobody that's a leader would not do what I did. And I know there's a risk, there's a danger, but that's okay. And now I'm better, and maybe I'm immune. I don't know.
There's nothing much to brag about.
Michelle Obama offered what the Biden campaign called her closing argument. The former First Lady criticized the president throughout, without ever saying his name.
A man who knew how deadly this virus is, but who lied to us and told us it would just disappear. Who, in the greatest crisis of our lifetimes, doubled down on division and resentment.
Still, Obama warns Trump's efforts to stoke such division could work. But she told Americans he isn't up to the job. And she urged them to vote him out. Catherine Kobayashi, NHK World, New York.
Sticking with the coronavirus in the U.S., top military leaders have gone into quarantine after a senior official tested positive. That sparked concerns over the country's defense. But the Pentagon says the armed forces will keep operating as usual. On Tuesday, the Defense Department said the vice command of the Coast Guard had tested positive. He joined meetings last week with other military chiefs. It said people in close contact with the official at the meetings are now self-quarantining out of an abundance of caution. They include Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, and the Air Force Chief of Staff. The Pentagon says they will be able to continue performing their duties while in quarantine. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has set out detailed requirements for coronavirus vaccine developers who want the agency to authorize the emergency use of their vaccines. On Tuesday, the agency released guidelines that drug makers need to follow if they want to request emergency use authorization for their vaccines before completing clinical trials. The requirements include at least 2 months of follow-ups after study participants receive the vaccine to assess their immune responses and other results. The guidelines also require safety data for more than 3,000 vaccine recipients showing the effects on their health. The requirements appear to be stringent enough to make the emergency use of a vaccine before the presidential election in November almost impossible. The decision may deal a blow to President Donald Trump's plan to have a vaccine available before the election. Democrats and medical experts had criticized Trump for putting pressure on the FDA to expedite the process. Some experts say they appreciate the fact that the guidelines will ensure the safety of a vaccine to a certain extent. But others say more strict requirements should be set out for a vaccine's emergency use. The head of the International Monetary Fund has said the global economy is recovering from the depths of the coronavirus crisis. But she also warned this calamity is far from over.
The IMF in June projected a severe global GDP contraction in 2020. The picture today is less dire.
The international body said in June the global economy would shrink by nearly 5% this year. That would be the worst contraction since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Kristalina Georgieva said there would be a small upward revision to the next forecast due out next week. The IMF head cited China's faster-than-expected recovery and the resumption of economic activity elsewhere. But she said all countries still faced a long ascent, with setbacks likely. Georgieva spoke to NHK after her online speech. She called for fiscal support to prop up the global economy.
We have to continue to help firms and workers as long as necessary to prevent bankruptcies and unemployment, and that sustaining fiscal support is crucial for the next months to secure this recovery.
Georgieva also warned of uncertainties still surrounding a global economic recovery, including the renewed spread of infection. The World Trade Organization is predicting that the global trade in goods this year will be down 9.2% from 2019 due to the impact of the pandemic. North America and Europe are expected to experience double-digit declines in their export volumes. Asia could see a fall of 4.5%. The WTO unveiled its forecast on Tuesday. The numbers take into account the ongoing resumption of economic activities. The WTO believes the declines could grow steeper if further waves of COVID-19 cases emerge, weighing on economic activities. The organization is predicting that 2021 will see a 7.2% rise in global trade, indicating it will still fall short of levels prior to the pandemic.
One of the greatest risks for the global economy in the aftermath of the pandemic would be a descent into protectionism. International cooperation is essential as we move forward.
He added that WTO is the ideal forum to resolve any outstanding trade issues stemming from the crisis. NHK has learned that the organizers of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics are expecting to slash more than $190 million in costs for the Games. They're expected to report the figures to the IOC Executive Board on Wednesday. The International Olympic Committee and the Tokyo organizers agreed in September on 52 items related to efforts to streamline preparations for the Games. The measures include reducing the number of officials by 10 to 15% from the currently planned 50,000. They say the staff reductions would save up to $28 million. They also say changes to decorations at venues and the Olympic Village would knock off more than $9.4 million. And revisions to the torch relay would save more than $7.5 million. The event's postponement is expected to cost billions of dollars on top of the original expenditures of over $12 billion on projects directly linked to the Games. For world weather, we turn to our meteorologist, Tsetsi Monare. Hello, Tsetsi.
Hello.
A tropical storm just formed in the sea south of Japan, and it looks like it's getting stronger. What are we expecting?
Yes, it's certainly getting stronger, and we should expect, typhoon-like strength winds and rainfall. And this one is trying to be as inconspicuous as they come. It is quite difficult to actually monitor the path and see where it's going. You can basically see from this track and also these very big circles of influence indicating that it could go just about anywhere. And there's also a trough that's sort of pushing it further towards the eastern side, and hopefully it will move along the ocean and go towards the east. But for now, we're monitoring it. By Thursday, it will come very close towards the Japan islands of Amami and also towards Kyushu. So do expect possibilities of heavy rainfall and also strong winds. Some of the stats, they indicate that it's finally picking up momentum and speed. It was very slow about a day ago, and now it's at 15 kilometers per hour, and then wind gusts of over 144 compared to Tuesday's 126. So yes, it is intensifying. You can also see those winds that are coming in. Most of the Japanese islands are going to be affected, and as it heads all the way towards that eastern direction, high waves could be coming your way as high as about 9 meters, and also rainfall could exceed 100 millimeters in certain places. For now, though, there is a bit of a frontal system that's affecting rainy weather towards Tokyo, Osaka, and also temperatures at 23 for Tokyo, but do expect a slight cooling down by Thursday and Friday. Crossing over towards the United States and much of the Atlantic now, we're seeing a couple of storms also at play here. These two are not so much having an impact at the moment, but Delta is the one that I want to focus on, and that's what's sort of causing havoc across the Mexican peninsula, Yucatan Peninsula. And remember, Gamma just hit there not so long ago, so people are dealing with a lot of impacts along those parts. What you should expect basically is hurricane category 4 strength to come your way there, so high waves maybe as high as 3 meters in certain places, definitely heavy rainfall which could lead to flooding as it treks along the Gulf Coast and possibly making landfall somewhere between Mississippi, maybe even Alabama. So please do take care and make sure you're watching your weather forecast as much as you can. That's all your weather. Take care.
Joining us from our studio in Tokyo, this is NHK Newsline. We start with the latest developments in what's become a chaotic race for the White House. Donald Trump says he intends to debate